Nick is my name, and I believed my marriage was stable. Audrey, my wife, and I seemed flawless but firm. After years of dating, we had our ups and downs like any other couple, but we always managed to find a solution, or at least, that's what I thought. Looking back now, I see that while I was clinging to the idea of our strong marriage, Audrey had already begun to drift away. It didn't happen all at once. At first, she stopped doing the little things, chores she used to handle without a second thought. People have mood swings, stress builds up, and life gets difficult. I understood that. But this was different. She started coming home late. Whenever I asked where she'd been, her responses were evasive, indifferent. "Just out," she'd say, barely looking up from her phone. If I pressed, she'd roll her eyes or sigh as if I was bothering her. This wasn't the woman I married. Audrey used to tell me everything, sometimes in excruciating detail. Now I was lucky to get more than a one-word reply. Her phone was always with her. If she was in the living room, it was there. If she got up, she took it with her, even for a glass of water. Late at night, I'd see the screens glow in the darkness. When I asked who she was texting, she snapped, "Just a friend. Why do you care?" One evening, as we lay in bed, I finally confronted her. "Audrey, what's going on? Why are you acting like this?" She barely hesitated. Letting out a sharp exhale, she muttered, "If you have something to say, just say it. Otherwise, let me sleep." That hurt. A few days later, my suspicions were confirmed. A friend called me. He was straightforward. "Hey, I don't want to be that guy, but I think you should check on Audrey. I saw her with some guy, and they looked like more than just friends." I couldn't speak. My first instinct was denial. No, not Audrey. Not my wife. But then I thought back to her recent behavior. The secrecy, the distance, the locked phone, the cold attitude. It all made sense. I wanted to believe my friend was mistaken, but deep down, I already knew. Still, knowing and proving, it were two different things. Audrey had always been protective of her phone, but lately her paranoia had escalated. No matter where she was, in the bathroom, kitchen, or just stepping outside, she never left it unattended. If I caught a glimpse of her screen, she tilted it away. That alone raised my suspicions, but I needed more than just a gut feeling. Then, one night, I got my chance. She had left her phone on the couch. My heart pounded as I walked toward it. This was it. I swiped up, locked. The password had been changed. I tried the old one just in case. No luck. Audrey had never changed her password before. This wasn't a coincidence. I put the phone back exactly where it was and sat there, realization sinking in. My wife was cheating on me. People think they can hide everything, but they always leave traces. Once they get comfortable, they slip up. If I couldn't unlock her phone, I needed another plan. I had to see it with my own eyes. A few days later, my opportunity arrived. Audrey said she was going out for a bit. No details, no specifics, just vague enough to trigger my instincts. I waited a few minutes, then followed her. Keeping my distance, I trailed her car through the city. She eventually pulled up in front of a house I didn't recognize. My stomach dropped. She got out, walked straight to the door, and knocked, like she'd done it before. A man answered. Someone I'd never seen in my life. He looked surprised, but happy to see her. He smiled, stepped aside, and let her in. The door shut behind them. I snapped a few pictures. Proof. I didn't call her. I didn't storm inside. I just sat there, staring at the house where my marriage was falling apart. Then, without a word, I drove home. Hours later, she returned, acting completely normal. That was the worst part. I had waited long enough. I called her into the living room. "Sit down," she sighed, clearly annoyed, but sat with her arms crossed, staring at me like I was wasting her time. I took a deep breath. "I want you to stop," Whatever this is, or we're done. I wasn't angry. I wasn't making threats. I was just stating a fact. She scowled, shook her head. What are you talking about? I pulled out my phone, turned the screen toward her, and showed her the pictures. Audrey walking into that house, the man smiling at her. For a split second, guilt flickered in her eyes. Then, just as fast, it disappeared. She scoffed. You followed me? You don't trust me? Her voice rose. You're stalking me now? That's disgusting. Something inside me went cold. She wasn't ashamed. She wasn't even sorry. She was flipping it on me, making me the bad guy for noticing. I let out a slow breath, stood up, and nodded to myself. Okay. That was it. The next week was a blur of silence. We still lived in the same house, but we were strangers. No fake smiles. No conversation. Just two people waiting for something to happen. But she didn't try to explain. She didn't try to fix it. I knew why. She wasn't done seeing him. I wasn't going to beg her to be faithful. So I quietly went to my lawyer's office and started the process. If she wanted him so badly, she could have him. But she wasn't going to break me. Then one morning, as I was getting ready for work, Audrey did something unexpected. She walked up to me and said, I'm making dinner for you tonight. I froze. For months, she barely acknowledged my existence, unless it was to be cold or dismissive. Now, out of nowhere, she wanted to cook for me? I glanced at her. She was scrolling through her phone, looking indifferent. My suspicions flared. I hesitated, waiting to see if she'd say more, an explanation, an apology. But she didn't. Finally, I shrugged. Okay. My tone was indifferent. I wasn't going to play her game. This is an effort to make things more amicable. Perhaps she wanted to make amends because she felt bad, a peace sacrifice of some sort. Or was she laying the groundwork for another confession as a justification for a last act of control before pulling the rug from under me? I wasn't going to sit around and watch to see what Audrey failed to do. I already knew. I had taken action. I wanted to leave this marriage. Divorce documents were carefully created and stored in a folder, awaiting the appropriate moment. And beyond that, I had a surprise in store for her. During her time spent skulking around, I had been seeing her secret boyfriend, someone close to her, including her best pal. It began as informal discussions, little moments of mutual annoyance regarding Audrey's actions. But eventually, it became more than that. She knew the woman well. Audrey had changed, and she no longer had illusions about her true identity. So, I determined whether tonight's dinner was some sort of mental trick. If she had something going on, I wouldn't dispute it. I would not plead. I would not become irate. I would just terminate this union on my terms. I returned home that night with a feeling I couldn't quite put into words. Audrey was there in the kitchen, and the air was loaded with the scent of home-cooked meals, something I hadn't experienced in a long time. If this had happened a few months ago, I might have been thrilled, perhaps even hopeful that she was trying to fix things. But I knew better now. This supper wasn't peaceful. I took a seat at the table, observing her as she moved elegantly, pouring the wine, arranging the plates, and grinning. We ate largely in silence. She didn't inquire about my day, and neither did I ask about hers. The only noise was the silverware clattering on porcelain, an occasional sip of wine, and the tension between us acting as a third presence at the table. Halfway through the meal, I set down my fork and glanced at her. She was too composed, too at ease, the expression of a woman who was already certain she had won. I leaned back slightly and asked, "So have you broken up with her?" She flinched, just slightly, then smirked, leaning back in her chair as if she had been waiting for this moment. Then she simply said, "I'm leaving you." I let out a slow, deep breath. There was more amusement than anything else. There was a time when those words would have shattered me, when I would have pleaded for her to reconsider. But now, they felt like a long overdue conclusion to a story I should have closed long ago. I smiled sincerely before getting up. I stepped out of my chair, walked into the bedroom, and returned with a neatly organized stack of papers. Placing them in front of her, I slid them across the table. My voice was firm, controlled. I've already made the first move. For the first time, her confidence faltered. She wasn't prepared for this. She stared at the papers, searching for some response, some excuse she could use against me. But there was only silence. Then, ding-dong. Her head snapped toward the door. She wasn't expecting anyone. I was. I pushed my chair back slowly and walked to the door. Opening it revealed her. Audrey's best quality had always been her effortless beauty. But now, standing in the doorway, was the woman Audrey had trusted with all her secrets, the woman I had been seeing ever since I came to terms. With the fact that my marriage was over, Audrey's new girlfriend's expression was priceless, beyond shock. Treachery, incredulity, and perhaps even sorrow flashed across her face. Audrey had overlooked one simple truth. When you play games, you'd better be ready to lose. And she didn't take it well. She snapped, moving from serene to utterly unhinged. In mere seconds. She yelled, called me every name she could think of, but I didn't argue. I didn't have to. My work was finished. On the table sat the divorce papers. She had a choice: sign them, or let the court handle the rest. At first, she acted as though she didn't care, as though she wanted to move on. But I knew her too well. The moment reality set in, she became the person I always knew she could be. Bitter, angry, willing to destroy everything in her path. This was never about marriage. It was about hurting me. She fought the divorce. She went to court playing the victim, claiming I had been controlling, manipulative, even abusive. She said she felt confined in our marriage, alone, unworthy. She weaved elaborate lies, twisting the truth to paint me as the villain. And the problem with lies? If said with enough conviction, they start to sound like the truth. But I refused to let her rewrite history. When it was my turn, I let my evidence speak for itself. Photographs of her sneaking into her lover's home. Text messages that left no room for doubt. Bank statements showing her secret withdrawals from our joint account, funding her little escapades, and then came the emotional toll, the real damage. Months of mental torment, the self-doubt, the second-guessing, the gaslighting. My lawyer made sure the court understood the psychological harm she had inflicted on me, and when the final verdict came, I saw it in her eyes. Defeat. The judge divided the assets fairly, but with my overwhelming evidence, I kept what I had worked for. She got nothing. She thought she could leave me in ruins. Instead, she exposed herself, and when I walked out of that courtroom, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: peace. You'd think that after all that, I'd feel satisfied. But the truth is, no one walks away from something like this unscathed. I told myself I had moved on. Audrey's best friend and I started dating. She had seen everything unfold, witnessed how Audrey treated me. And unlike my ex-wife, she actually seemed to value me. Yet, deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that no matter who I was with, I'd always be waiting for the other shoe to drop. Once trust is broken, it never fits back together the same way. Could I ever trust someone enough to marry again? I don't think so. Not right now. Not because I don't want to, but because I don't know if I'll ever see love the same way again. It's like touching a hot stove as a child. Once you've been burned, you flinch every time your hand gets too close, and I got burned badly. But in the end, I learned something. Sometimes the people you trust the most are the ones who betray you the worst. And the best revenge? It isn't anger, it isn't hate. It's moving on. living well. Becoming someone they can never touch again, and making sure they regret losing you every single day. And trust me, Audrey regrets it, and that, my friends, is my story. I know, it's a wild one, but that's life. You think you know someone, you live with them. You build a life together, and then, one day, they throw it all away like it never mattered. But I didn't let it destroy me, and if you ever find yourself in a situation like mine, don't let it destroy you. Now, I want to hear from you. Do. You think I handled this the right way? What would you have done? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And remember, if something feels off in your relationship, it probably is. Don't ignore the signs. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.